student from that class. An argument you may hear is that, but that class is one of those classes that may be required. And this is the curriculum that we approved. And so if your student withdraws from that class, they're not going to get credit from that class. The question I would ask then is, would you rather have the parent withdraw that child from that class, or would you rather have that parent withdraw your child from your school and take that funding with them, or have that school district lose those funds? This is an opportunity actually to have the students stay within that school district, not have to take a class that their parents have sincere objections to, and then hopefully have a conversation about why that took place and what we can do to make sure that there aren't objectionable materials. I've got quite a bit of testimony here because a lot of it came from testimony that we gave last year on a transparency bill. I included it because it's got a lot of footnotes, and I'm not going to go into detail about that. The links are there. Look at those links. But as you can tell, anybody that's been paying attention on K-12 reform knows that there is a groundswell of support for making fundamental changes in public education, not only in Kansas, but all across the country, and some states are way ahead of us on that, and there have been some phenomenal turns of events, both politically and policy-wise, in those states. Parents are paying attention. I sometimes use the example of parents are always looking for, if they have got a problem, they look for somebody who's responsible. For years and years, the assumption was, well, we're not performing very well because we just don't have enough money. And so we have all these years of litigation, and everybody was banging on the legislature. If you just spent more money, then everything would be okay. And so the target were legislators and anybody who was not funding schools appropriately. Well, once the court signed off on the funding, and the governor has announced that we are constitutionally funded and fully funded, but the results, the outcomes are still not what we expect, the parents still want answers. They know that funding's not the issue. We've always suspected that funding was not the issue, but now we know that funding is not the issue. There are some fundamental problems in the public school system that need to be addressed, and we need to get kids up to proficiency. Less than half the kids in the state are proficient. That's criminal almost, that we, in this day and age, in this great state, that we've got so many kids in public schools that are not proficient. And yet, here's the huge disconnect. As graduation rates are climbing and awards are being handed out for how great we're doing at graduating kids, and our proficiency levels are going down, what does that tell you? We've got to have diplomas that mean something. We've got to have diplomas that mean that this student is college or career ready. We're hearing it from the regents all the time that these kids are not ready for higher education in many cases. But anyway, so you have a lot of data there. If legislatures don't respond, the polling suggests that changes will be made. And we're seeing that in school board races, and we're seeing that in legislative races. So I really hope that you would spend some time to focus on kids, focus on the parents. The parents aren't dumb; they're watching, and this, I think, is a reasonable approach. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
We'll go through the proponents, and then we'll go for questions after that. If you'd stand by, sir. With that, our next proponent is Kirsten Workman. She has one of the most important jobs in the room. She is a parent. She is also a homeschool educator from Lenexa. Kirsten, welcome to our committee.
Thank you very much for having me today. Oh, a little lower? I'm a little short. I'm actually from Lansing, Kansas. My oldest child is a senior at Lansing High School, USD 469. I'm a registered nurse with a master's degree in nursing education. Last year, I resigned from a full-time faculty position with the university, in part so that I could homeschool my two younger children. I'm here to talk to you about the assault on parental rights coordinated by many of our public school teachers, administrators, and the labor union they serve. I'd like to preface my remarks by sincerely thanking the honest, tireless, and caring teachers and administrators who keep politics, sex, and revisionist history out of our children's classrooms. It's difficult to summarize my experience trying to insulate my oldest daughter from English assignments that were sexually explicit, violent, full of vulgar profanity and slurs, moral relativism, gender-based identity politics, Marxism, propaganda, and unabashed critical race theory. Here are my records. I have a binder of records of course materials and email communications. I brought a copy of my slideshow that I presented to our Board of Education, which tells the whole story, and I'd like to offer that to you for your review if you'd like it. I first voiced concerns to my daughter's English teacher and principal when she was learning how to analyze fairy tales using a Marxist literary lens and also a post-colonial lens and a feminist lens. The teacher immediately ceased all communication with me because, and I would quote her, when I would finally meet with her later, she said, "My concerns were curricular in nature." The principal began pressuring me immediately to withdraw my daughter from her English course, this is over 6 weeks in, and enroll her in an online alternative that would require her to start over to earn her credit in an online format. I refused to require my daughter give up in-person instruction and 6 weeks worth of already completed work to start over in an online course. I asked the teacher to excuse my daughter from future assignments that involved Marxism, post-colonialism, or gender-based identity politics as part of her English classes. I said that that would be possibly appropriate for government or sociology, but not for English literature or English composition. The teacher would not honor that expectation and instead then encouraged my daughter to write about the ways her gender affects her perception of her identity. I started asking more questions and requested to see basic information that was absent from the course syllabus. After weeks of asking for that, I finally had to submit a Kansas Open Records Act request to get a partial response from our superintendent. Instead of being transparent, the administration emailed me hundreds of pages of material, much of it completely irrelevant or no longer in use. The administration obfuscated, delayed, ignored, and outright lied to me about the course materials and the context of their use in the classroom. I would request to meet with the teacher 9 times before the Board of Education would force her to have a conversation with me. I received assurances from the administration that our daughter would not be required to complete assignments that conflict with our family's values and religious beliefs. Yet the reality in the classroom was that far-left, opinion-based political writings were presented as factual, expository writing. Students were required to take and defend one-sided social activist stances in order to participate, develop their expository writing skills, and receive feedback from the instructor. When I was finally able to meet with the teacher about 6 weeks later, I told her that my daughter may not read any more sexually themed material in the class. Less than 2 weeks later, my daughter was reading arguments in favor of abortion and the unfettered access to pornography. The assignment mentioned the titles of 2 pornographic films, compared child pornography to child labor, and discussed differences between erotica and types of porn that heterosexual men find gratifying. The entire English course was morally depraved. This teacher exercised total disregard for our parental rights, religious beliefs, and other strongly held values by repeatedly exposing our daughter to material we objected to. She did so with defiant impunity, with the full knowledge, coordination, and support of the administration. The repeated breach of boundaries was so unyielding that by early December, I felt I had no alternative but to inform the district that my next step would be to contact law enforcement for assistance in preventing our daughter's future exposure to subject matter dealing with sex or pornography. After our governor vetoed the will of the people for a statewide Parents' Bill of Rights, our local Board of Election voted to adopt one. You can see that it did me no good. I was persistent and consistently civil in my communication, yet the teacher and the administration stonewalled, obfuscated, and outright lied about the materials until they were finished teaching the unit. Because I objected to this material, my daughter faced bullying and intimidation from her peers and multiple other teachers, and lost out on 6 weeks of instruction, sitting in a conference room being ignored by her educators while I waited for them to speak with me. Please enact legislation that requires teachers respect parents' directions for their child's education. But even more importantly, please require teachers map their course objectives to the State Board of Education standards. The Department of Education is right. There's no CRT in our state curriculum. It's being inserted by teachers, given free rein to teach whatever they want, regardless of the subject matter they are contracted to present. This is a pervasive culture, or excuse me, there is a pervasive culture in academia that those who teach are not to be questioned or held accountable, and that parents are ignorant. They are using taxpayer-funded resources to indoctrinate our children with communist far-left political ideas. They're doing it everywhere, right under our noses, while very few of our kids are actually learning to read, write, or understand basic algebra. The teachers' union is too powerful, and parents need to be able to demand accountability if we are to protect our children. Thank you.
Thank you. We also had oral testimony from Brittany Jones from Kansas Family Voice. She is out sick today, so she will not be coming to testify, but you do have her written testimony in your file, along with Noelle Fries, parent and homeschooler from Coffeyville, Lucretia Nold, Kansas Catholic Conference, Tim McCabe, parent from Lenexa, and Debbie Detmer, citizen and grandmother. And with that, I would like to open it to committee for questions from the proponents. Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. O'Neill, if you would step forward, please. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I was wondering what happened to you. Mike, I'm a parent, as we heard, with some grievances against my school and the teacher. What's the process I go through to do what she did? Well, how's that? Do I go to the school board first, the administration first? Walk me through that, could you please?
There's no right answer, no wrong answer, as far as I understand it. The administration would be the first place. The school boards, I guess this would be an opportunity to explain something that maybe is not well understood, and that is some people think that the school board is there to serve administration. Actually, the Constitution very clearly makes it just the opposite. The school boards do have control over the local school districts, and are responsible. So in terms of the organizational chart, if you want to start at the top, you would start at the Board of Education. I think as a practical matter, a common sense matter, it would be you start with your local school and do exactly what she said. I mean, you try to interact with that teacher, and if you're not getting anywhere there, you take it up one chain, and ultimately you may have to get the school board's attention on that. But I've lost count of the number of anecdotal stories that we've gotten. This is just one of the best I've ever heard presented in terms of just the frustration of teachers. And for the most part, they end up giving up. They try, and they don't get anywhere, and they finally just throw their hands up. And now whether they do anything beyond that, whether they keep their kids in school and just wring their hands and say there's nothing I can do, or they actually take action and go someplace else. We've tried to accommodate those with open enrollment legislation, with tax credit scholarships for those that can't afford public schools. That I realize I'm getting a feel from your question, but starting at the classroom level. Because if the experience is with a particular class, then the problem may be as limited as the discretion that a individual teacher has that the administration may not be aware of. And you'll find out if they're aware of it if you have to take it up the chain. And like in her case, the administration basically endorsed or did not do anything about the problems in that classroom. In which case, if the administration's not going to do anything, you've got to elevate that, escalate that to the board level. And obviously, it's gotten to the point where they feel like the legislature has a role, and the legislature definitely has a role under the Constitution. The State Board of Education shall enact such laws as may be provided by law. And when you see that in the Constitution, as provided by law always means the legislative branch.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mike. Ms. Workman, would you please come forward? I have a question for you. Thank you for being here today. It takes a lot of courage to come up with this group here. when you were bringing up terms as Marxist and pornography, did your daughter create the awareness, or did you discover it?
Did my daughter bring it home to me? Is that what
Yes.
you asked?
Yes.
Yes.
Those were the words that she used.
Yes, we were talking, and I've told this story many times. We were talking in the kitchen about an assignment where she had to rewrite a Grimm's fairy tale. I said, that sounds great, using a different literary lens. And I said, oh, really? Which one did you choose? And she said, Marxist. And so I was shocked, and everything sort of unfolded from there.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Partial.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is directed towards Mr. O'Neill. First of all, I've got to say I do love the idea of this piece of legislation, and I don't think any parent should ever have to go through what Kristen went through. But my concern is the Bill of Rights of the United States Constitution doesn't give us rights, it protects our rights. And this piece of legislation would be granting us rights. And when we try to itemize natural rights, we inevitably and undoubtedly marginalize the rights of people. So there's certain sections of the piece of legislation that I would not necessarily support based on the fact that it is creating a piece of legislation that's giving us the rights rather than protecting our rights. Do you have any recommendations or any thoughts behind that?
Well, I wasn't one of the founders, but the founders made it very clear in the 14th Amendment that those rights do exist. It is a right. And so I don't know whether we're talking semantics here, but this merely recognizes a right that is already in place, and it's an individual right. This is not a right that is being recognized to the detriment of any other right of any other person. This is a personal right for the parents to direct the education of their children. And so I see it as basically staying in the lane that was contemplated by the founders in the 14th Amendment, and that's been recognized in, I think, Section 1 of the Kansas Bill of Rights. So this is not creating anything that does not already exist.
I think my fear is that it'll limit what already exists. So, but thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, to follow up on that, it is what already exists. We're just codifying it into education. So it's constitutional language. Representative Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kristen, if I could get you to, so I don't need a lot of examples. I'm predisposed to believe what you're telling us. But could you give an example of a Marxist or a Grimm fairy tale told through a Marxist lens? What might that sound like?
Well, I wouldn't let my daughter choose that lens to rewrite from, but the examples provided in class were to encourage students to take a look at the fairy tale and then ask themselves who has the power, who might be a marginalized group in society, who has fewer rights and less money, and then to sort of twist the fairy tale on it, I guess, on itself and retell it from that perspective.
Okay, and so what does that sound like?
To be blunt, it sounds like communism to me, yeah, and social indoctrination.
All right, thank you. And then for Mr. O'Neill, does this bill, in your opinion, create any more work for teachers or the administration?
Well, what I would contemplate is if the second prong of this is not only a parent being able to complain about it, which probably technically already exists, and that is to actually do something about it and withdraw their child, then obviously there's some administrative work that goes with having that child dismissed from that particular class. Other than that, I don't see any work involved. And getting to your earlier question, I remember a famous United States Supreme Court case on pornography. I think it was the Larry Flynn case where the Justice Potter Stewart famously said, "I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it." You know, the problem is definition. but it doesn't take much definition for parents to know it when they see it and know it when they hear it. So that's why there's not a lot of legislation out there that tries to define CRT, for example, or whatever. I think those efforts are probably doomed to failure because there will always be a way around it. The way to get around, the way to really deal with it is to make sure that there's full transparency and then let parents observe and make their own judgments. You had a follow-up question.
Yeah, I did. So I was at a meeting this fall, and we were talking about transparency, and this was a meeting with educators, and they were saying that we're transparent. Any parent can come to the school, any of our schools at any time, and find out anything that they want. And the problem is hardly anybody ever takes us up on it. Do you find that to be the case?
Again, it's all anecdotal. We hear that a lot as a reason not to actually burn it into statute. So like I said in my opening remarks, I'm going to assume for purposes of argument that the transparency is there, the parents know what's going on, and they see what's going on and don't like it. Getting back to the transparency, I think there's still a need in those cases where transparency is kind of in the eyes of the beholder. The administration has one definition of what transparency looks like. Parents have a different definition of what transparency looks like, and the devil's in the details. And we've had trouble actually getting those two perceptions of transparency to actually meld, and that's where we've gotten some legislation that tries to flesh out what is meant by transparency. I would say, in answer to your question, it is not universally accepted that transparency is already there in every school district. I can tell you that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Murphy, then Representative Featherston.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Mr. O'Neill, I was just, not really a question, I think it's probably already been, you sort of kind of addressed it. I look at this as this is we've got God-given rights, and this is one of them. And the wording in this sort of like does in the Bill of Rights. In other words, the right already exists, and it's just sort of outlining it and saying, would that be a fair statement?
I didn't say it any better than what the chairman said earlier.
I was trying to do it, but I couldn't.
No. Oh, he nailed it. I can't add anything more than what the chairman has already said.
Thank you.
I'd repeat it, but we don't want to be, yeah, no, it's fine. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure who to direct the comment or the question to, so respond as you wish. So I'm a pretty hands-on parent. My daughters would say I'm probably the biggest influence in their life. They might just be like BSing me to get some money out of me or a new pair of shoes. I'll admit that. Is there anything in current statute that prevents parents from parenting their children after school to say, wow, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. This is completely wrong. This is how we think of it. And I think it'd be great if we did our own essay at home to combat this nonsense you're seeing at school.
Yes.
I don't want to take over the teacher's job that the teacher's being paid to do, that I in part am helping to pay for that. I do talk to my children every day about what goes on in their classroom. I spend time teaching my other two children. Parents are busy, and not everyone is as blessed as I have been to stay home and be able to devote that time. There's a lot of working dual income families, so moms don't want to tell their children, your teacher is teaching you something that's completely wrong, because it undermines the whole system. So I've worked very hard the entire time my children were in public school to support the teacher, and even when I felt like the teacher was doing something that was incorrect or just wrong, I never wanted to correct that in front of my student, or in front of my daughter or her student, just so that I could help to work to maintain the credibility of the public schools.
Thank you. Representative Haskins, and then Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. O'Neill, Thank you for your testimony and your comments. I'm just trying to wrap my head around the issue. There are some generalizations that, specifically you said parents are watching, parents are upset, but do you have any data or any surveys that are specifically to Kansas? Because my constituents have not voiced any concerns from parents on this matter.
On page,
Yeah, on the Ed Week, is that?
yeah, I mean, I gave, in the interest of time, I didn't share all of the all of the data and all the surveys, and one was specific to Kansas, Survey USA, commissioned by the Kansas Policy Institute, and again, it doesn't give specifics. It gives. It's a general survey.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Time does not permit us to go through every one of the anecdotal stories that we hear, but we have many emails pointing out specifics.
would that not be an example, though, if we did go through that of transparency, of going through the anecdotal stories? I mean, isn't that something that before we do a law, isn't that what you're asking us to do, is to be transparent and to hear everybody on that?
Yes, I'm not.
That's fine. My other question, that's okay, and I appreciate that. And the other question I would have is, how would you define academic freedom?
Who's defining it? Is it the administration?
How would you define academic freedom?
That parents have the right to direct the education, upbringing, and moral and religious training of their child in the context of education.
And what about the
public education system?
Absolutely.
Meets those expectations of parents who put their kids into public schools.
And specifically now, what about teachers and their academic freedom? And before I answer, a couple days ago, we had a discussion about bringing back due process for teachers, and that, I don't know if that went really well. And so now we have to question them a little bit more specifically about what they can teach. So are you saying we need to limit their academic freedom?
Academic, again, not to parse words, but academic freedom at the post-secondary level is going to mean something different than the elementary and secondary level, where we've got impressionable kids, and there needs to be, in my humble opinion, there needs to be guardrails around how our children are taught before they reach an age of maturity to truly think on their own and explore lots of other theories and options and that sort of thing, and that is fundamentally the role of post-secondary, not elementary and secondary.
So teachers should stay in their lane when it comes to teaching. They shouldn't deviate or have any freedom to interpret.
Freedom within the coursework that they in the curriculum, and so curriculum development is a big issue as well. I think you used the stay in the lane. Maybe I used it first or whatever. It's one of my favorite terms. I mean, if education stayed in its lane and taught kids and got them proficient in those areas, and that let them mature and think for themselves, that would be great. To a large extent, I don't think that's going on right now. With all due respect.
May I speak to the concept of academic freedom as an instructor?
Yes.
Thank you for the chance to answer. I taught at a college level post-secondary education for several years, and academic freedom is important, and I strongly believe in that. I don't think teachers should be micromanaged, but I think that teachers should know to operate well within their scope of practice. That as a nursing instructor, I'm not going to attempt to teach my students in my classroom about algebra, and to do so would be a misuse of academic freedom and the ability that my superiors and also the academic, the accrediting bodies that sort of legitimize, and fund what we're teaching. Thank you.
Very good. Representative Younger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
My steps in.
I did. Thank you, sir. Quick, I just want to make sure I understood this. You were doing dishes or fixing dinner with your daughter that night, and she said that they had this assignment, and she chose to select the Marxist lens, I think is, were there other options for her to choose?
Yes.
Do you know what those were?
The other options were the post-colonial lens, the feminist lens, the archetypal lens, and there was one more, and it's been several months, so I'm sorry I don't recall. And so that was the very first thing the teacher pointed me toward, was that there are other options for her to choose from. And I accepted that, absolutely. But when I went to go and help Natalie redo her assignment that she'd already completed with a different lens, I found that the teaching materials, the PowerPoint slides that the kids were learning off of, the other lenses were less developed than those three. Okay. You're welcome.
Representative Donahue.
I got it on. Mike, this is more of a comment, I guess. I just want to thank you for what you're doing. I think this is very, very important. I think that we've seen the fact that the parents are greatly upset with COVA, what they've learned having to get involved after COVA, and what was being taught to the children, what wasn't being taught, and that type of thing. And I think KPI is doing a great job, and I think the parents need this help, and I commend you for it. Other comments I would make, one of the things that I have mentioned to people with regard to education is education, the teacher's profession, I think it's one of the few professions out there that had to have a federal law passed in order to get it to do its job. And by that I'm talking about No Child Left Behind, okay? This is federal legislation to say, look, you're not doing the job, you're going to have to change, you're going to have to do things, and there's going to be some penalties imposed. And one of the things that children were given the ability to do is leave a school. If the school wasn't performing after X amount of years, they had the ability to change schools and everything. When this went into, when this was legislated in the state of Kansas, the dropout rate was 24% in Wichita and Topeka, 24%. And the graduation rates at that time were in the 60% levels. And obviously with No Child Left Behind, there were standards and you had to meet them. And of course, many of the teachers were upset about it because they had to get the levels up or the child could leave. But I think the most telling indictment to the state of Kansas is the education challenge that Obama gave to all the states. And I don't know if you remember this. I went to a lot of educators and they're like, oh, I've never heard of that. Race to the top. Is anybody familiar with Race to the Top in the Obama administration and what they did? And it was, there was $5 billion and you could submit your standards and everything and get a piece of the $5 billion. And that situation, Kansas submitted its application and it was rejected. It was rejected completely. And they came back and they had 4 evaluators that evaluated each state's submission. And the state of Kansas, every evaluator gave it a failing grade. And they talked about the things. Dropout rate, no standards for dropouts, no standards for teachers, no standards for this, no standards for that. And Governor Parkinson formed about 20 committees. I don't know. It was not done within the legislature. It was outside the scope of the legislature with the purpose of creating standards to resubmit for the Race to the Top, and you can look it up. 20 committees were formed, and they started on the process, and they determined there's no way that we can complete an application with all the deficiencies that the state of Kansas received. And so one of the things they pointed out is that the state of Kansas had received $1 billion in new funding, and their quote was, and their test scores have not gone up one iota. Okay, this is Duncan, I think, was the head of the education department, the Department of Education, Arnie Duncan, and through Obama's administration. And as I say, I went around and talked to administrators. What do you think about the race to the top of Kansas Mission? Never heard of it. I've never heard of it. And I didn't find one single administrative person that would admit that they had ever heard of this, and the fact that they couldn't resubmit. So, you know, I listened to all this and the defense of what teachers have done, and it's just, if you look at history, it's just an abysmal record. I mean, it's embarrassing to say, I would think, that I'm a teacher when we're getting the kind of results, or have been, in this state. We have only a quarter of the students are qualifying for college in all 4 categories. And yet, we go on with these subjects and discussions in CRT, which are so far outside the realm of what people, what parents, what many parents, what most parents want their children educated on. So getting back, thank you. And keep up the good work. We're getting there. We're getting scholarships. We're getting this. We're getting that. We're getting homeschooling. We are beginning to make a difference. And believe me, it will continue because of the parents.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Appreciate your remarks. I appreciate the role you allowed me to play to facilitate your comments.
All right, yeah, we gotta move on and make sure when you're asking questions, we gotta stay relevant to the bill here at hand, definitely. Representative Schmoy.
Ms. Workman. I want to say how sorry I am that you and your family have gone through this. I share in your frustration. I've been in very similar shoes with my own school district. In a perfect world, since we're talking about seeing things through lenses, in a perfect world, we all have something that in a situation like this should have been handled a certain way. What would have been your perfect world scenario when you very first contacted the teacher?
In a perfect world, she would have met me at the table or taken one of my 9 invitations to respectfully dialogue. I told her many times, your input is important to me. I want to understand your perspective. Let's work together so that Natalie can explore some of this material in a way that doesn't compromise our family's values and religious beliefs. And I think at any point in the nine weeks, I guess, or 6 to 9 weeks that this went on, I think if anybody had accepted that at that time, I would have gladly met them there.
Okay. I have one follow-up question. Was your daughter during this time, did she go through any kind of singling out? Was she ostracized by staff or other students?
In very indirect ways. So there were, I think, inadvertently, my name and address was posted on the board docs website. And so there's a lot to this story that I don't have time to share. So some of that information was put out, which confirmed, the student who was already missing from class for a few weeks, and she was approached by multiple people about it. And then she was subjected to a long conversation in a hallway between a student and another teacher who was sympathetic to the district on the matter. So she got to listen to that for quite a period of time.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
All right, we're gonna have to move along because we still have to get the opponents and questions for that. So in respect for time, I'm gonna have Representative Miller, Representative Estes, and Representative Haskins, and then we'll close out the proponent side.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 quick ones, if I could, if that's all right. So I was hoping one of the conferees could possibly elaborate for me on the concept of CRT, or critical race theory, and what that what that specifically is defined as.
Briefly, because I do want to stay on the topic of the bill. I don't want to get off on a sidetrack of some of this other stuff for sure. So let's.
What I'll refer to is when I was given the opportunity by our Board of Education to discuss some of the material that I wound up challenging in our curriculum, I first looked at, okay, well, I know what I think CRT is. What does everybody else think it is? What does the literature say that it is? And so I'm just going to refer to a list of criteria. And I reference authors R. Delgado, D. Bell, and A. Freeman, who are all educators or writers who are proponents of the value of CRT in education. So that's where I did my research and sort of explored the concept. So these are the bullet points I'll read to you as to what they define CRT, that Western societies are systemically racist, that society is divided into two categories, the oppressor or the oppressed, and this is critical, no one has a say into which category they're assigned to. It's based solely on their outward appearance. Race is a social construct. It uses the concepts of storytelling and counter-storytelling, so kind of what we were speaking about earlier about that Marxist literary lens, forcing a student to indirectly defend a different viewpoint and retell a story. Whether or not they agree with that viewpoint, they are, by having to retell it from that perspective, they are indirectly defending it, and that's an example of counter-storytelling. Last three bullets, whites are the actual beneficiaries of civil rights legislation. Racism is unavoidable, irreversible, and so therefore, and this is a summary of what I read, requires government intervention and socialization to government control over society in order to remediate damages, both current and historical. So that is how I defined CRT when I challenged that material and called it CRT.
Thank you for elaborating on that for me. I like to play devil's advocate whenever possible. And I would like to first comment that I learned about Marxism and communism. I also learned about Christianity, Islam, other religions while I was in school, for obvious reasons, because we should know about these things. However, so if this bill were to be passed, I believe that we could have some potentially some sticky situations regarding religion and how teachers are held accountable for individual religious beliefs. And I would say that I have an atheist friend who has kids who could take offense to any reference of God at all in school. I have Muslim friends that might take offense to the word God being used instead of Allah. I have a very diverse group of friends that would probably be able to use this to get their child out of having to learn about many things that we all learn about in school, which I would argue to take all of those things and call it history rather than whatever national talking points we want to bring up at this point. But personally, I think it's okay to teach kids about history, and I think that we should not whitewash it or sugarcoat it for the sake of coddling children's religious beliefs. So, thank you.
I actually agree with you. Well, there's not a question there, so we'll see if there's more questions for you, but I do want to move on and stay on topic. I do agree, though. I think we can all agree that history, factual history, should be taught. Factual history. Free of political interpretations and all of that. So, yeah. Very good. Representative Estes for the last question.
My question is for Representative O'Neill, and I'll get started while he's approaching the mic. Is there a difference in your mind between promoting one political worldview and academic freedom? And number two, do you think that it's important to respect any family's religious practice to be respected during their academic upbringing?
Well, I definitely agree with the latter. The reason I'm stumbling is you referred to me as representative, and I'm just a recovering politician, and so I really I haven't heard that expression in a long time, but I appreciate it. Tell me the first one again.
Is there a difference in your mind between promoting a political worldview and academic freedom in the classroom?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, most definitely. I can elaborate, but I'm afraid the chairman is going to.
Briefly, if you don't mind.
Right.
Briefly.
Yeah, but, you know, the concept of academic freedom is within the lane that you have been hired to accomplish, you know, the subject matter and that sort of thing, and the curriculum that has been approved. There is a good degree of academic freedom to that. Inculcating with personal, political, religious views of the teacher goes outside that lane, and that's the difference between those two in a nutshell, in my opinion.
Very good. We're going to close the proponent side of this. Committee, you have neutral written-only testimony from Rabbi Modi Reiber from the Kansas Interfaith Action. Make sure you take a look at that. With that, we're going to open up the opponents section. I know Jim's been chomping at the bit to come at me all day long. I'm just kidding. No, Jim, it's always good to see you. Welcome to our committee. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I gave you 2 donuts this morning, so, you know.
Yes, you did.
Need to be
They were
able to
very tasty.
find
Thank you.
Thank you, committee, for allowing, pardon me? Thank you, committee, for allowing me to speak in front of you. I represent United School Administrators, School for Quality Education. And, you know, this has been an interesting, I don't know, almost an hour since we've been here. And I certainly, you know, appreciate Mrs. Workman's comments and what she had to say. And I think everyone in this room feels for what she shared with us. With that being said, you know, we, the group I represent, we do not oppose parents. We certainly don't oppose, you know, wanting parents' input and even the guidance, you know, with respect to the child's education. You know, I appear opponent to this bill because of I think it's overreaching, and the fact that this bill will allow a parent to, you know, Mrs. Workman's case would be a good example. But it also, if somebody, and I was contacted by a principal of a high school who said, do you realize what this bill could do? You know, we have eligibility. People are going to take advantage of this eligibility with respect to activities. If a kid's not doing well, loafing, not doing his assignments, not taking care of business, and he's getting ready for the game this Friday night, well, he's going to be exempted from a biology test or a math test or whatever for various reasons, because it is such a vague statement, you know, as far as what's harm. And those are concerns that I have. I'm not going to argue with Mr. O'Neill or Mrs. Workman, because they have good points. As a former school administrator, a superintendent, or principal, you know, it was running through my mind as Mrs. Workman spoke on what I would do. And you know, and I'm not saying Mrs. Workman's comments weren't accurate, but you know, there's 2 sides to every story. I'd like to know what happened in Lansing. You know, the superintendent there, Mr. Wessel, I think is going to be leaving this year. I don't know all the circumstances behind it, but I know that we in public schools, we're far from perfect. And examples like this certainly gives the schools, you know, a black eye. But at the same time, we have policies in place. When I was a superintendent principal, the number of board policies that we went over to, you know, I can't count the number of times we went through policies to rectify what Mrs. Workman was talking about. Policies are in place. Now, it's up to the local school board, and we are a local control state. You know, when I was in the legislature, how many times did we talk about that being local control? And I think when the legislature decides to dictate to every school district in the state what you're going to say, okay, you can't hold this kid accountable because somebody might think it's harm. it's too broad, okay? You know, I'm not opposed to the fact that, you know, we want parents involved, because we do. I've certainly got off my, testimony, but at the same time, I feel like what we've talked about today, it's certainly a sensitive issue. We are not perfect. We need to work on it, but passing a bill this broad does not accomplish, I think, what you're wanting to do. I'll be quiet if you have better questions, because I know we've got a lot to do yet.
We do. Always good to see you. Thank you, sir. With that, Ms. Leah Fleiter from the Kansas Association of School Boards, welcome. It's always good to see you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thanks for this opportunity to appear today on House Bill 2236. I would echo somewhat Mr. Carlskint's comments. We, in Kansas Public Schools, we work with parents every day. Parents are members of the PTO, they're room parents, they're site council members, they drive for the field trips, you know, they're in our classrooms every day, and we work with parents extensively. And, you know, usually a school board member like myself, I was a former school board member, we're usually parents or grandparents who have a vested interest in a good community school district relationship. So, so that there's a lot of give and take and exchange of information that happens. You know that the public schools in your communities are economic drivers. They attract business. They are the main employers in your districts. I know many of you share with pride the good things that are happening in Abilene or Emporia or Ulysses, you know, in your public schools. I think when you had the Kansas Teachers of the Year here a couple of weeks ago, that was a good opportunity to ask them about their concerns about, or, you know, you could have asked them whether they teach some of these things or you know, how they interact with parents. I think they talked quite a bit about their relationship with parents and how they value that. And so we kind of, to echo Mr. Carlskint's concerns, we feel the bill is overly broad because, you know, our concern is, you know, my two kids, unfortunately, inherited their mother's lack of aptitude for math. And so if I could have, you know, opted my kids out of 8th grade algebra, it would have, you know, saved at least one of my kids a lot of time and us a lot of money in therapy over their difficulty with algebra. And so if you're able to opt kids out of a core class that prepares them for post-secondary success, whether it's to go to college or to get a welding certificate or to do, you know, enter the military, that's obviously something that we would be concerned about. And so, especially as the representative of the 286 school districts in Kansas who serve nearly 500,000 kids, we really can't support this overly broad provision because we feel it's not in the best interest of Kansas students. And finally, I think you all must be very tired of some of the culture war conversations that you have, some of the votes probably that you have to take. I know parents are, I know school board members are. We are willing and stand ready to work with you all and the community to support public schools and to continue this conversation. And we think we can do that without enacting this bill. So I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Very good. Thank you very much. Next, we have Lauren Tice Miller with KNEA. I should ask you, do you mind me calling it KNEA or do you want me to spell it all out? Kansas National Education Association. Whatever's easier.
I have no problem with KNEA.
All right.
All right. Chairman Thomas, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to stand before you again today in opposition to House Bill 2236. I want to start by making it very clear that Kansas NEA does not oppose parental involvement. In fact, when I testified last week, I explained kind of our process that we adopt resolutions by our members, and those are used to guide our organization. And we have one specifically pertaining to parental rights. In the interest of time, I won't read it to you. The language is included in my written testimony. Additionally, we have 6 core values. One of them is partnership, and we believe partnerships with parents, family, community members, and other stakeholders are essential to quality public education and student success. But we believe it should be just that, a partnership. Partnerships are most effective when they come with mutual respect and a shared goal. which in this case is preparing every student of every ability for success in an ever-changing and diverse global economy. Once again, we believe we have a bill before us that is attempting to address a perceived problem, which in this case is founded in a national effort of misinformation and divisive rhetoric rather than a real problem. In my written testimony, I have included 12 board policies that apply directly and indirectly to parents' rights to direct their child's education, as well as procedures to object to content and how to opt their student out. I would draw your attention to just a few of those quickly. One of them is policy IB, which establishes school site councils in which parents have an opportunity to be involved and provide feedback on curriculum that may be considered, as well as bring forward any problems or any concerns that they have. And those are open meetings, so even if those parents are not actual members, they can still attend and provide feedback. Policy IC establishes that all of the curricular offerings of a school must be available at a central office and available for inspection. The problem is a lot of these are covered by copyright, so they can't just be copied and scanned in for a quick review. Someone has to actually go to the district office to review them. I will also draw your attention to policy IKD and IKDA, which both involve religion and protect religious beliefs and being able to outline the way to object to those. Furthermore, some boards have even adopted their own version of Parents' Bill of Rights as they have the authority to do so. In fact, if memory serves me correctly, Lansing has adopted a policy. And furthermore, I believe that there's an organization recently developed that has model policies available, including the Parents' Bill of Rights, that local school boards can adopt. Further, it's not uncommon for educators right now to make alternative arrangements for students to accommodate their beliefs. They work with the parents, starting with the teacher. The parents start with the teacher. They work with the parents to find suitable alternatives so that the student can still complete the assignment and the requirements of the course and be able to move forward. And oftentimes when curriculum is established, a list of resources is available, and it gives options then to students so that the teacher can accommodate those student beliefs. With that, we question how allowing students to be completely excused from the assignment altogether with no academic penalty, as outlined in this bill, is not a direct violation of locally adopted board policies, the course standards, and graduation requirements as established by the Kansas State Board of Education, or even the academic requirements, eligibility requirements of KSHA to participate in extracurricular activities. We believe in upholding the Kansas Constitution, which clearly establishes the duty and authority. Parents already have the right to elevate these concerns to their local school boards, and there is a chain of command usually published on school districts' websites to start with the teacher, move to the principal. If they're not satisfied, they can move to the superintendent, and they then can go to the board. However, there is still the right to go to the board at any time. They can also share their concerns with the State Board of Education. And lastly, voters have the ability to impact the direction of their public education by voting. An educated and well-trained workforce is essential to a healthy economy. Therefore, we encourage legislators to join us, our educators, as we continue cultivating partnerships between parents, families, community members, and other stakeholders for the purpose of preparing our students' success. And we urge you to oppose House Bill 2236, and I would be happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Okay, committee, thank you. I will point you to the written-only testimony from Patty Jurek, and President of Kansas PTA, Ann Mon, and Dr. Dean Horst, Kansas Board of Education, Kara Williamson, retired teacher, Martha Pint, League of Women Voters, Kansas, and Pat Gouger, private citizen of Overland Park. With that, committee, are there questions? Representative Ruiz. Oh. Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Representative Ruiz. We have standards for graduation that guarantee our institutes of higher ed that our students have met certain requirements to receive a diploma. If parents are opting kids in and out of units, classes, semesters, whatever the case may be, at a random nature, at least to some people's perspective, how Are we going to get our kids into college within or even outside Kansas when those schools have no idea what their academic background is?
Absolutely.
That's actually a great point that you make, and it is a concern that we have, particularly since colleges are going to expect a certain level, just as you said. And our concern is that if these students are exempted from completing those requirements and they get to college and they are not able to be successful in that course, is it going to set them back? And are they then going to have to take remedial courses in college, which is going to add to their costs and extend their time there? But furthermore, our concern with that is that it's going to be reported back to the legislature how many more remedial courses are going to be taken, and what is that going to then continue to do to the reputation of public schools and our educators.
One follow, I promise something. I didn't want to be elitist. I also want to point out, I went and visited the Pipe Fitters Union a couple years ago, and I saw their problems on the board, and it was straight up trigonometry they were doing at Pipe Fitters, and I had a little flashback right there. But how are we going to get into the trades if we don't have the basis to do that? And then, you can extrapolate that. How is the whole country not going to fall apart if we don't have labor that's qualified and educated?
Well, and I think that's why it's important to continue cultivating those relationships with the business community. We've seen a lot of work done over the past few years with the state board and what they've done with the business community and identifying what qualities they're looking for in a successful future employee. And so I think how this is even going to affect what businesses for apprenticeship programs or internships all feeds into that.
Representative Hill, and then Representative Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Two questions. Okay, first of all, Jim, you talked a little bit about extracurricular activities and eligibility there.
That was the example that I was contacted by someone using that specific example.
Okay. I kind of remember when visiting with Kansas High School Activities Association that to be eligible to participate in extracurricular activities, you have to be passing in a certain number of classes. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
So I'm questioning why a parent requesting that a child drop a class and they drop that class, why that would have a problem with eligibility, because wouldn't that actually decrease their eligibility?
Well, a couple of things. The Activity Association has total number of credits. They don't list specific courses you need to take. And most high school students, if they're on track without failing any courses, they're able to meet those requirements. And then in many schools have an additional eligibility requirement. They do it on a weekly basis, and it's a burden for a lot of people, teachers, administrators, but the most boards want this so kids don't get behind. If they want to participate, they need to keep up. And so that's what the administrator that contacted me about was, okay, we can opt kids out, but they can't be held accountable, so they'll be able to play Friday night or Tuesday night or this weekend.
I guess I'm still not understanding why. I mean, if they have to be completing a class to be eligible and they are failing that class, and if they drop that class, I'm not sure I understand how that would increase their eligibility.
There's no harm. They can't be held accountable.
They're not completing the class. It's not how many classes you're enrolled in, it's how many you're successful at.
That's true. I'm not getting my point or what I'm trying to say across to you. It's the total number. They don't look at, say, math and science. They could look at other courses too. It's the total number. But the example of a weekly eligibility is opting them out of an assignment, a test, or whatever, to not hold them accountable to that. And so because of that, they're able to participate.
And so if they stayed in the class and did not complete the assignment, they would not be eligible, but if they dropped the class, they would be?
This interpretation was they could opt out of that assignment.
Okay, that's one interpretation. Thank you. The other question I have is for Leo. And it's a little bit the same question in that I think high schools in Kansas have standards for graduation. Is that not correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if parents opted their children out of classes that were required for graduation, wouldn't that affect their opportunity to graduate?
Yes. I think our concern is that the way this bill is written, it says that the student's academic record may not, I think the word is suffer or something. And so that leads us to say, okay, so the kid didn't complete ninth grade math, but their record can't reflect that. And so, because their parents opted them out, and so they're not prepared for life after high school.
Okay, I don't see that this bill is trying to circumvent high school graduation requirements, but maybe I missed something in here.
Maybe it needs some further work then. Yeah. It's just, you know, what board members and administrators see when they see a bill that says something as broad as this bill does.
Okay. It seems like to me that if the parents and the students want to do something that's going to cause them academic harm, that could be their choice to do that. And, you know, schools as a whole decide what is required of a student to graduate and receive the opportunity to go on. And if they do not complete that coursework, you obviously have the ability to say they did not complete that coursework.
That's true. That's true.
Okay.
And if they go on to some kind of post-secondary, as Ms. Tice-Miller pointed out, they go to, okay, I live in Manhattan, so I'll say they decide they want to go to K-State and do whatever degree program they decide they want to do. But because they opted out of some of these things, maybe they got a high school equivalency degree or something like that. So they go to K-State, they're not properly prepared, they have to take remedial classes, which, you know, wastes the student and parents' time and money. And, you know, we have a lot of conversations in this building about that somehow becomes the school district's fault that child arrived at K-State unprepared.
If the school district did not provide them with a high school diploma, I don't think the university would fault the high school. Okay.
Certainly a conversation we should continue.
Thank you.
I agree wholeheartedly. Representative Sanders and Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I sit here listening to this discussion, it dawns on me that the proponents of this bill think that we've got a fairly significant problem, and the opponents of this bill don't think we have much of a problem at all. So I want to cite a real-world example from USD 305, which is the area where I represent, and see what the opponents think about this. So a woman appeared in front of the school board, and she was objecting to a book because she thought it was pornographic in nature in parts, and she wanted to read aloud a page-and-a-half excerpt from the book and was not allowed to do that at the school board meeting. Do you think that she should have been allowed to read this out loud at the school board meeting? And I'd like to hear from any of the opponents.
Having been to more school board meetings than I care to count, I would say it has to do, you know, I think she needs to have her feelings, her thoughts shared. I don't know if it needs to, I don't know what the policy is in Salina, because 305 Salina, where, you know, what the policy is, how they go about it. There's a procedure to get on the board agenda to meet these things. You know, frankly, every school district in the state has policies regarding that very thing. You know, when I was a principal and a superintendent. We went through over policies each year around all the things that's been talked about. And, you know, we had, what was it, it was November before last when there was so much contention around board meetings, and not board meetings, but board elections. And a lot of, you know, there was a lot of changes made on school boards. Yes, you know, there are issues. As I said earlier in my testimony, we're certainly not in a perfect society. Now, how I can, you know, I think I can't answer for what Salina did or did not do, but I'm confident they have a policy for it.
Thank you. Anybody else want to tackle that? Knock yourselves out. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm assuming you mean metaphorically. You're not encouraging anyone to harm themselves. Okay, just making sure. Representative
Yes, Mr.
Haskins, and then for the sake of time, I'll kind of finish us up here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Leah, as you're coming up here, I'll just start with thank you again. Yesterday, we arranged a group of school board members, and it was very informative, and that's the basis of my question. A colleague of mine concluded the meeting by asking them, do you need us to do anything, or should we just trust you and do your job? And they came back with, you should just trust us. We got this. What issues are overall as school boards are you seeing with parents coming to board meetings upset as described, wanting this right? And if you are seeing them, how do you have this?
I think some of the conversation I heard yesterday was, yes, we're asking you to trust us, but we welcome.
Sure. Yeah.
So I just want to make it clear that that they weren't saying trust us and, you know, don't come to the school.
Yeah, absolutely. You're correct.
So as far as parents coming to the meetings, I think the most difficult time was probably during COVID, when there was a lot of conflict and concern over schools being closed and about remote learning. And I think we saw a lot of folks who felt very strongly about making their voices heard, but it was sometimes in a way that, you know, we had several districts who would do a live feed of their school board meeting, and then they would get, YouTube would kick them off because of something that a public comment made. And so, am I answering the question?
You are,
I got a
and
little
it's
off track there.
No, it's you're doing just fine.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I just am trying to wrap my head around this problem. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
parents are welcome to be involved. Everyone encourages the parents to be
Mm-hmm.
involved, but yet it seems generally the parents are extremely upset and that they're not involved in this and that we need a state law for this. And so I'm just trying to get a sense from the board, is this a problem?
I haven't heard from a lot of our districts that it's a widespread problem. I think you tend to see it maybe in more of some of the larger districts, that you see a little more of this conflict because there's just more people with more opinions.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that there is, you know, I think it's been referenced before, if a parent has a concern, you know, the first thing the board asks them to do is, oh yeah, you know, go ahead and visit with the teacher first. You know, I took some of those calls myself when I was a school board member. You know, I don't like the way they're, you know, handling the PE class or something. And I said, well, have you talked to the PE teacher? So I think part of the issue is probably a little bit of a reluctance to just kind of talk to the teacher first. And then, you know, if you're not satisfied with the outcome, that's perfectly fine. And then they would ask you to, you know, talk to the principal. Maybe the principal and the teacher and the parent could meet. And then, you know, eventually, you know, you might need to move it up to the school board level. But I think sometimes people feel like, well, you know, I'm really upset about an issue, and perhaps, you know, they have justification for that. So I just want to go right to the board meeting, and I just want to kind of flame people, you know. And I would tell people, because I mean, and I've had friends who are like, you know, the kids at our high school are really upset about this issue and they want to come to the board table and they just want to nuke the heck out of, this situation. Well, okay, I understand that. And maybe I agree with, whatever topic it is that they're upset about. But, if I'm an employee of a business and someone is upset about the quality of public service that I provide, wouldn't I rather have, if you're not happy with the way I rang you up at Dillard's, should you talk to me? Or should you go right to the owner of Dillard's, or should you go to the store manager? Could you do me the courtesy of working with me to address the issue? And so, I tell people to try to treat people as you would want to be treated. Take it up with the teacher, take it up with the principal, rather than just kind of, storming the school board meeting, which, makes us all feel good. I mean, I've certainly been in situations where I've wanted to, storm a meeting or two myself. But, if we could just try to work through the process, and in most cases, it's addressed before it becomes a huge issue.
Thank you very much. And I did have one follow-up, but I would like Lauren to come up, if I may. And Lauren, as you are coming up, real quick, in reference to teaching license.
Yes.
And a colleague just showed me that there's a code of conduct or a code of ethics that they have to sign. One of the bullets is that all teachers must follow federal law, state law, local law. If this has been deemed as part of the Bill of Rights, if a teacher violated that 14th Amendment, would they not lose their license if it's proven?
There is that potential, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, just full disclosure on the record, I would like to point out that was an example Ms. Flighter gave. It was not an attack on a PE teacher. And also, Dillard's employees are fine people. So, generally, Representative Estes, real quick, and then I'll finish this out.
Mrs. Flighter, I think we talked to different groups of people, and I think this is part of our miscommunication. I think we talked to your non-customers, and in a lot of ways, we're the complaint department for them.
Okay.
Because as a parent, I have had issues similar to the one that the parent testified to today. And I was fortunate that mine resolved in a positive outcome, mutually happy. But through that process, I was very much cognizant that my child had to survive in that school when my complaint was over.
Mm-hmm.
And it does stifle a parent, that natural urge to, you also made a comment about the open period on the agenda. I have received complaints from parents that they get the agenda packet so late. I've even gotten that complaint from school board members, by the way, that they get their packet so late. They don't feel like they have adequate time. They also feel hamstrung that they only get to speak on the public agenda, that they don't get to speak on other items. Do you think that this is an area where we could work together to get agendas out earlier and to give parents better access to voicing their views?
I can't comment on, the 286 school districts and how they deliver their packets. I think some of them, I know, put them, when I was in Manhattan, they put it online on Friday afternoon, and the board got it and the public had access to it in time for a Wednesday meeting. But I realize that some of our districts may be more technologically challenged, and I think some are still like printing out packets, and so you'd get that to the board member. It might even be through the mail, or they would have to come pick it up. So, I mean, those are just some issues that I can't comment on specifically. As far as what they can address on the agenda, that was your other question? Typically, you'll have public comment at the beginning of a board meeting on anything that's not on the agenda. And it's, in a lot of ways, it's not unlike when you have a very busy committee hearing like we're probably going to have in many cases in this legislative session, and people get 3 minutes to talk on the topic because the board or the legislature has business that it needs to conduct. But then as an issue works its way through the board process, you know, it could be a month or 2 or 3 that this issue of the math curriculum comes up and it's addressed at a board meeting and the board votes to adopt it. There, at least when I was on the board in Manhattan in up to 2020, there was time for people to comment at that time. You know, you might have to wait through some pretty dry discussions of, you know, school bus purchases and that kind of thing, but you do, in my knowledge, you do have the opportunity to comment on a business item later in the meeting when that's an action item for the board. I might be misunderstanding your question, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, I appreciate your feedback. And just so you know, I'm aware of one school district that publishes their agenda on Friday and they vote on it on Monday. So if you're a citizen who would like to find information, you basically get one business day to get an answer out of somebody in your Department of Education. And to the second matter, I've been to school board meetings where public comment is it, and you never get another chance. So if we want to build that level of trust, it would be nice if we could work together to remedy those things.
That's good.
All right, just a couple quick comments and we'll finish up here. So remedial efforts were brought up. I'd just like to point out college grads are already requiring remedial efforts. Like I know in the district near me, 54% of kids are graduating and need remedial efforts in college in reading. So I think that pretty much negates that particular argument. It was brought up that this was a national issue, not a Kansas issue. I'll point you to 2 examples. My daughter, being told before she had to leave a classroom, had to fill out and not take home an assignment all about a gender unicorn where it was gender assigned at birth, all these questions, these intrusive questions about gender and her feelings, and turn it in before she left. And I believe the conferee that was a proponent is from Lenexa. So to say this is a national issue, not a Kansas issue, there's 2 specific examples right in front of you, so I take issue with that. That's just not true. The constitutional language and the rule of law did come up, and I will say again, this is language in the constitutional being codified into education. This is not recreating words in the Constitution. This is taking current language and tying it to education. The reason we did that was because I asked the question, if this were to go to the Supreme Court, since this language is not in education in a separate part of the Constitution, could the court potentially rule that that language did not apply? And I was told, possibly. That's enough for me to say we need to codify this law into education so parents have the unalienable right to the upbringing of their children. We're not recreating language or anything like that. So the last thing, so last year we did the Parents' Bill of Rights, which this is not. The bill was very specific. There were multiple bullet points, multiple pages, and we were told this is too intrusive, there's too much, a lot of this can already be done, you're putting pressure on the teachers. And so we've really listened to that and took a good hard look at it, and we created this. And so now we're sort of at the opposite end. So now we're a little bit too broad. So I would challenge the opposition to this bill. Let's find a way to meet in the middle. Now, it was too specific, now it's too broad. So how do we fix that? Let's figure out where we can be more specific, strengthen up the terms of this, and I'm happy to hear you out, and I think that would be good, and then we can finalize a piece of legislation that is in the true efforts of compromise. Just a suggestion. So with that, committee, we were going to work the bill we heard yesterday on the Promise Act today. We are out of time, and I spoke incorrectly yesterday. It's not the Senate, it's House elections. It meets in here at 3:30, so my jab at the Senate was unnecessary yesterday. Very good. So we will plan on working that bill tomorrow, the Promise Act bill. There is an amendment that ties to some of the conferees that we heard yesterday that we already have drafted that will be offered, those minor changes. But I just wanted to let you know we were going to work it today. We ran out of time. So with that, if there's nothing else good for the good of the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you.